Hello, curious trail runners, and welcome to Beyond DNF. I'm your host, CTS coach Adam Ferdinandson, and right now we are back to the usual format. We got an athlete who needs a little bit of help. We got a crack coach on the team, on the call, ready to help that athlete. This week, we are joined by Clark Perks, an athlete in New Jersey, who I think brings a lot of unique situations to the table that we haven't come across yet. He trains in a very dedicated, methodical way, with some really big weeks in there, but hasn't quite found success at the 100Ks that he's been attempting. And when I first started speaking with him, I definitely was scratching my head a bit myself because it didn't make some sense, which I think we really got to the heart of in this episode. And it's part of what makes this one particularly interesting and fun to me, because it wasn't necessarily a case of, you got to get more consistent or something like that. It was a lot more nuanced. So I hope you all enjoy that too. One of our coaches that was going to be on this had to step out at the last minute. So thank you very much to Travis Nix for joining us. He jumped in the day prior, didn't have time to prep it. I'm not sure he even knew what this podcast was beforehand. He's one of our newer coaches on the team, but he brings a lot of experience with his education and then his experience more in the lab side of things. And I think you can hear some of that expertise come through here as well. So was really happy to have him on here, and I think he made it a great conversation. As usual, if you would like to be on the show in the future, you can shoot me an email at beyonddnf@gmail.com and we will get you on. Without further ado, I will let you all enjoy this episode. Well, Clark, if you want to get us started, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe even a little bit about how you got into running?
So sure. Again, I live in New Jersey, about 45 minutes from Philadelphia to place me geographically. Lived here all my life. We call it the Delaware Valley. Um, I am 57 and I got into running when I was 14 years old. And I can't do that math. Is that 43 years ago? Does that sound like in the ballpark of right?
Close.
19,
Sounds good. Yeah.
yeah, 1981, my freshman year of high school. I didn't do cross country that year, but I did start with winter track. And then I did, 4 years of winter track, 4 years of spring track. Actually, I take that back. 5 years of winter track, 5 years of spring track, because I did a postgraduate high school year, which is a whole separate conversation. And then, 4 years of cross country. I wasn't bad at cross country. I was number 5 on my team, but our team was pretty good. I think, my junior year, we were third in the state among Group 4 schools, which are the largest high schools. And we really thought we were going to go all the way. As seniors, we had the whole team came back. We were all in good health, but like anything else, it just wasn't in the cards. So I actually think we did a little worse my senior year than we did our junior year. Um, I actually tried my first marathon when I was 16 years old, which was extremely foolish. Because although I was well trained to run a 5K, I was absolutely not trained at all to run a marathon. And I made it to mile 24, and I could not crawl the last 2 miles. So that was quite possibly I'm almost positive that was my first DNF ever. And in 1996, when I was about 20 in my 20s, my late 20s, 29, I think, is when I completed my first marathon, which was the Marine Corps marathon. Um, done a maybe a dozen or more marathons since then, and maybe a half dozen ultramarathon distances. I've never run like an actual ultramarathon race. And my marathon distances, most of them are actual marathons, but there are a few that are just, especially COVID. COVID was the first, just around my neighborhood marathon that I did. So,
That's interesting that you haven't done any more formal races. Why is that?
you mean more formal ultras?
Yeah, for ultras.
Well, a couple reasons. One was how I got into the ultra distance in the first place, which was an organized run, but not an official run. So there were a lot of other people running it with me, but it was a, I don't know if you've ever heard this term. I'm sure you have. It was a fat ass run. So
Hmm.
no medals, no support, no closed roads. You just show up and run it. And so that was the first time I even contemplated running more than a marathon. And since then, I've continued to increase the distance. I started first one I did, it was 50 kilometers. I couldn't make it to 50 kilometers. But I did, once I got to 26.2, I'm like, I'm going to run to 27 and it'll be the longest run I've ever done in my life, which I did. And then the following year, I did complete 50 kilometers. And then the year after that, I'm like, I'm going to run to 32 miles because that'll be the longest run I ever did. And, but, it's a lot harder to find an ultra marathon than it is to find a marathon. You can find a 5K every single weekend. You can probably find two
Hmm.
every weekend, but it's a lot harder for me to find an ultra that fits into my schedule. So far, I've just tried to push the distance, and I've attempted running 100 kilometers twice and failed both times, which is how I met Adam.
Well, I'm definitely excited to get into that. I know the first event, the fat ass you were describing, is very interesting, and I just think it's fun to talk about. So, if you don't mind describing it.
So I would love to talk about that. So, in 2013, there was a journalist named Dan McQuaid. I want to give the credit where it's due, and he wrote this article, and it was called "How Far Did Rocky Go in His Training Run in Rocky 2?" And he was from Dan McQuaid was from Philadelphia, so he loves Rocky like everybody from Philadelphia does. And he was watching the running training montage in Rocky 2, and he noticed that it didn't make any sense. Like Rocky started up in North Philly, and then all of a sudden he was down, in South Philly, and then all of a sudden he was over, by the art museum. And he's like, if you take all those, now obviously that montage was not intended to depict a single run. Um, but it kind of is cut that way. So, like at a certain point, like a little kid starts running next to him, and then it's two little kids, and by the end, it's like 30 little kids when he runs up the art museum steps. So he looked at all those places in Philadelphia, and he mapped out what is the shortest distance that Rocky would have had to have run to do that montage in the order that montage goes, and it ended up to be 50 kilometers. And so he published that story. He even published the map, the route. And immediately that year in December, a group of people, started posting online. We're going to run this. We're going to run this on the first Saturday in December. It's going to be a fat ass run. Show up and run it with us. And one of my friends from kindergarten, of all things, one of my friends from kindergarten posted on our Facebook page, I want to run this. Does anybody want to run it with me? And I foolishly said, I am not in any shape to run 50 kilometers, never done it before, but sure, I'll run with you as far as I can. And that's how I got into it. And they are still running that Rocky fat ass 50K. They have kept it up ever. I guess it's coming up on. I think it was the 11th year or 12th year this past December.
I love that history of that race. That's hilarious.
It's crazy.
I love it. It's a very kind of pragmatic. Let's look at this movie and see if this actually makes sense and figure it out. I love it.
And it's really neat to cover all those different areas of the city of Philadelphia. A lot of the areas are very common for running, like along the Delaware River and along the Schuylkill River, and past the Art Museum at Summit. But there's a big stretch of that run that goes through an area of Philadelphia called Kensington, which is it's not a it's not a great place. It really struggles, and so you get to see like the best of Philly and the part of Philly that is having a hard time, which is it's really unique.
Yeah, definitely. So you started running in the 80s. You've definitely built a solid base. We've got that established. Between here and there, have there been any like big hiccups in training? Did you take years off at any point? Or has it been pretty consistent, just smooth training for decades?
No, I would say that I've never taken a year off, and I never stopped running. So, after high school, I kept running in college, but not, as part of a team. It was really just, sort of random. I went to college in Bennington, Vermont, and there was a 10-mile run that I would do that I could run from my dorm to New York State and then turn around and run back. And I always thought that was kind of fun. So, ran off and on. But then, again in the mid 90s, started getting a little bit more serious about it. And when I say a little bit, um, for maybe a solid decade, I would run marathons. I would run at least one marathon a year with my older brother, but I would never train properly for it. I would get up to about 36 miles a week, and I would do a long run of like 16 miles, and that's what I was running marathons in. Uh, I want to say from like 2009 to 2011, I actually started training a little more seriously. Got my mileage up to 50 miles. Not sure when I did my first 20-mile training run, but it was around there. And so my time started dropping. My older brother, who's almost 20 years older than me, he always beat me in marathons by like a lot. But I think in 2012, I pulled, I pulled even with him. It was around that time I broke 4 hours in the marathon, and my marathon times have been dropping since then. I just ran my fastest marathon ever in November, the Philadelphia Marathon. So amazingly, I think it's amazing. At 57, I keep getting faster each year. Maybe this will be the year that I finally can't go any faster, but I haven't hit it yet. Oh,
Yeah.
and again, my
Mhm.
training has gotten a lot more um, outrageous. I run more than 400 miles in a month. I think it's the most I've run in a week. I think is 100 and uh,
8, you said, I believe,
eight.
correct?
Yeah, 108.8, which I just did in September. So um, I'm running faster and farther.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
So yeah, as Adam has mentioned, you have this base built up, and even prior to that unofficial 50K, you had mentioned that you in 2008 attempted an Ironman triathlon and were basically there. You were 4 miles short.
So sad. Yeah.
But this aerobic engine, if you will, or really aerobic interest that you have had has been long-standing. If you would, you just mentioned that as of recent, in the last few years, you have had an increase in both volume, and your training has been more outrageous, and as a result, your times have been dropping. Has there been anything else significant aside from just pure volume that you have changed in your training or your approach to training that you can identify? Or I guess what I'm getting at is I'm trying to dig up what else could be contributing to these, improved times.
Well, I would say that since 2018, in 2018, so I use Runkeeper to track all my runs, and I have been since like around 2010. And I credit Runkeeper for being a game changer in my marathons because, like so many people, Adam, I heard this on your podcast before that, you know, everybody goes out too fast. You know what I mean? Like nobody ever regrets going out too slow. And as a matter of fact, even back in the late '90s, my joke was, I'm going to start out slow and then I'm going to ease it back a little bit, and run
Oh yeah.
slower.
Slow
But I
down
never,
less.
yeah, so yeah, but I never did that. I always went out too fast. You know what I mean? But once I got Runkeeper, it had this magical feature where it would give you your average pace anytime you want it. You could get your average pace every minute. And, you know, when you've got your average pace every minute, you really can run like clockwork if you pay attention to it. And so, the first marathon that I ever used that, like really, really, really used it was Yonkers, which was 2012. And I said to myself, okay, I am gonna just do my target pace like a clock. And if I get to mile 20 and I'm still feeling good, then I will basically take my foot off the brake, right?
Yep.
And I was having to slow down.
Yeah.
And then I took my foot off. I felt good at 20. I took my foot off the brake, and I had a great PR. But in 2018, I noticed that some of the PRs that Runkeeper tracks, and there are 21 of them, that some of those PRs of mine were as much as 6 years old. So I made a goal in 2018 that I was going to set all 21 of those PRs. And, with the hardest generally being, marathon PR, most miles in a week, most miles in a month, most elevation in a single run, most elevation in a week, most elevation in a month. And I did it in 2018, and it was a lot of fun. I did not try to do it in 2019, but I tried again in 2020, and I did it in 2020. And there's something I think about trying to set all those PRs that you really get a broad base of training. Everything from your 5K PR, the most elevation in a single run. That really equips you. I mean, I don't know how it would work out west in the mountains, but Philadelphia or the Poconos or any place on the East Coast, if you can run 4,000 feet of elevation in a single run, there's not going to be a hill that's going to you know um, bum you out too much.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I have gotten to those most miles in a week, most miles in a month, have just been to say, okay, however long I'm going to take to do this, whether it's 6 months, 9 months, whatever, I know where I need to end up at the end of September or the end of October. So I know where I need to be for the month at that time. I know where I need to be for the week at that time. I just do the math on a spreadsheet backwards to wherever I'm at that day and say, okay, if I increase this in 2024 was if I increase my mileage, my total mileage, 3.85% a week, I will hit that most miles in a week, and I'll hit that most miles in a month by the end of September. And if you look at if you look at my weekly graph, it is a perfect line. I don't know whether that's logarithmic or longitudinal, but it's just a perfect curve that increases 3.85% a week. And I've gotten, I mean, it's kind of crazy, I think, but it seems to work.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is one of the prettiest Strava graphs I've ever seen in that way. I've never seen it go off without a hitch quite so perfectly like that. And, we'll get into it more, but I mean, you knew you had to reach a certain point. You increased at a relatively conservative rate. So you're running more and you're doing it slowly. Those foundations right there are really important. And it doesn't sound like, you can see from the graph that it kind of went well. You didn't have any giant injuries or anything. So, I mean, could you have built in some more like recovery weeks or like maybe had a slightly different system? Sure. But to me, the big foundational pieces are kind of there.
Yeah. And that running slow, I heard this in one of your previous podcasts, Adam, that you run slow to run fast, which is it seems counterintuitive when you say it out loud, but 2023 in 2023 I was on track to run my most miles in a year, and it was also my fastest average pace for a year by like a lot. And then in October I tore my hamstring, so it was a real dramatic example of trying to run too fast.
Mm-hmm. I mean, well, you definitely saw the results there that workload and performance are very well correlated for the most part. There's caveats here and there, but I mean, I could make this a very boring podcast if we just every time left it at that of, run more and, it gets more complex, but that's a huge piece. Cool. Well, I definitely want to hear about I think it's 2 attempts at the 100K.
Yes.
And I want to hear almost like down to the minute where it went wrong and what led up to that. And then we can kind of dive into the nitty gritty and the how and why and maybe what you can change.
Sure. Well, the first attempt was 2022, and I believe it was in October, and um, I wanted to try to run from Philadelphia to Long Beach Island, New Jersey, on the Atlantic Ocean. So basically, if you picture southern New Jersey, I wanted to run across the whole state. And so I had a pretty direct route from point A to point B, and it actually went past my house. And I started, well before dawn. I had to run over the Ben Franklin Bridge to get from Philadelphia to New Jersey, and I cached my hydration and nutrition every 5 miles. And if I had completed it from Philadelphia to the ocean, it actually would have been 67 miles, even though I was generically calling it 100 kilometers. Okay, so I'm about 5 hours in, one marathon down, and approximately 1.4 marathons to go. Legs are hanging in there, sorta, mostly. I wish it wasn't so warm and sunny. And 20 miles in, I felt fine. My 20 miles is about where I went past my house. My son jumped in and ran the next 7 miles with me.
Oh, cool.
And I'm not exactly sure where it went off the rails, but I want to say somewhere in the 30 to 40 mile range. So just past the halfway mark, 50 kilometers, 31 miles and change, just over 6 hours in now. Legs really starting to feel it. I don't know. I kind of think I have a 50-50 chance of making it to 100 kilometers. And there were a couple things that threw me off significantly. One, it was really warm for October, and it was really sunny. So that wore me down a little bit. I think I ran a little too fast. And this is the kind of weird part, though. From I don't have the map in front of me, but let's say from mile 35 to where I gave up, which was 53 miles. They were on roads through the pinelands of New Jersey, so no houses, no nothing, and they had really wide shoulders. Having said that, what traffic that was going past me at like 70 miles an hour, and groups of motorcycles would come flying past me. I want to say like 100 miles an hour, and so loud that it sounds like a bomb going off. And psychologically, I think that had a really that really threw me off my game. And then once I got out to Route 72 in New Jersey, that's a pretty heavily traveled 2-lane highway. Again, super wide shoulders. I don't think I was ever in any like actual danger, but it's just disconcerting, to have traffic flying past you, that whole time. So my crew, my wife and my son, they were watching me on Runkeeper because I was broadcasting it, and they started seeing me slow down more and more and more and more. And they actually got in the car and were driving towards me when I called them, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm not gonna make it." So I went past the 2 marathons back to back point, which I was pretty proud of. But then I had to tap out. So that was my first try. So I thought, well, what did I learn? What kind of things will I learn? I was running too fast. I need to run the same amount. I need to stay off major highways. Having more support in terms of bathroom breaks or hydration or nutrition might be helpful. So for my next try, which I just did this past year, I just mapped out a approximately 10-mile route near my home. And if I had run that route 6 times, it would have been 100 kilometers. So no traffic. I've always got food and drink, available. And I would carry some with me too, so I could hydrate or eat, in between the 10-mile pit stops. And first marathon in, I felt pretty good. I recorded a video clip of myself because I was hoping to record a video clip of successfully doing it. But then by the time I got to the halfway point, 31 miles, I recorded another video clip, and I was feeling it then. And at that point, I gave myself a 50-50 chance. And same thing, it was sunny, it was warm. I was starting to feel that even though I could carry hydration with me, it wasn't enough hydration. Stomach was getting a little bit bummed out. My son, who again is also a runner, he said to me, well, I'll jump in and run with you. He's like, should I jump in at mile 50? And this was before I started. I'm like, not mile 50 because I don't know how this is going to go. Right. I might tap out at mile 50. Why don't you jump in at mile 40? And then I'm pretty sure I can make it to 40. So he jumped in at 40, and at 40, I was still feeling pretty good. But from 40 to 50, it all just went down the tubes. And by the time I got to 50, um, I was really, really hurting. Again, wanted to make it my longest run ever, so I wanted to make it to 54. But from 50 to 54 was just excruciatingly painful. And stomach got really bummed out by 54. As a matter of fact, so I was talking to my son. We had hit 54, so we were walking back to the house, maybe the last quarter mile, and I was explaining to my son my concept of the vomiting scale, where 0 on the scale is you don't have to throw up at all, and 10 is you are throwing up. And I was like, I'm at like a 9.5 or 9.7. And I actually went to 9.9 on the throwing up scale, which is in the road on your hands and knees, like fully mentally prepared to throw. I didn't, so I didn't make it to 10, but it was really a problem. And when I got back to the house, that's when I posted the following on Facebook. And I posted it on a couple of big running Facebook groups I follow. And I posted, I'm trying to run 100 kilometers, and I've failed twice in 2 years. I got just over 50 miles before before pains in my legs stopped me. And both tries filed weeks of doing over 100 miles, and I can easily do 20-mile runs. I picked the route and the nutrition, the hydration. It wasn't like a particular race. I've done multiple marathons, multiple 50Ks. What am I doing wrong? And I got some good advice from those posts. But yeah, those are my 2 tries.
What were some of the big takeaways from the advice?
So the big take, it broke down into 2 categories: advice that other people gave me, and then my own internal advice that I was giving my health. But the advice that people gave me is that, so far as I know, and y'all can correct me if I'm wrong because you're the coaches, when you're training for 100 kilometers, when you're doing a marathon, the 20-mile long run is the common long run. You don't extrapolate, from what I understand, you don't extrapolate that for ultras. If you're doing 100 kilometers, you're not going out and doing a 30-mile run. Or if you're doing 100 kilometers or 100 miles, you're not going out and doing a 50-mile run. But what people do say is back-to-back long runs are the gold standard for that. So like if you can do a back-to-back 20 miles followed the next day by another 20 miles, that's a good indicator that you're in shape. And I have never done that. I've tried. I ran 20 miles one time, and then next day I went out and like, I wonder if I can run another 20 miles, and I could only make it to 14. I've done lots of back-to-back like 15 or 16 milers, but I think one of the things I would try for the next time is sort of building up those back-to-back long runs. Try to do back-to-back 16s, back-to-back 17s, back-to-back. If I can make it up to doing back-to-back 20s, I think that would help. A lot of people said I was running too far. A lot of people were like, 100 miles? Seriously? That's too much. You should be able to do a 100K on 50 to 60 miles a week. A lot of people asked me if I did a taper, which I didn't. I typically think of tapers in terms of like setting a PR time and not so much a PR distance, but people said, no, you're an idiot. You should, for that distance, you should do it. I think one person suggested doing a 4-week taper, like 80%, 60%, 40%, 20%. Um, and then the last piece of advice I got from other people was walking more. So walking regularly, even if you don't feel like you need to do it, maybe run 8 minutes, walk 2 minutes. One person said, walk up every incline, no matter how big of an incline it is.
And is that during the event that they're referring to?
Yes. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And then my own advice is, and again, this is the classic mistake, running too fast. So first 10 or 11 miles, I was running 11-minute 30 pace, which I thought was reasonable. Then then mile 11 took me 30 minutes, which was an epic bathroom break. And so now I'm back on the road again and looking at my average pace, and I'm like, I had to try to get it, back down to 12 minutes, which was stupid because mile 12 and mile 13 were both under 9 minutes, which I think was way too fast.
I have that highlighted, by the way. There's one 802 mile at mile 12.
Yeah, that was ridiculous. I mean, that was looking back on it, it's like a head slap moment. It's really hard to run that slow, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, another thing I was thinking about was trying to get out of the sun and starting at just after midnight. So it's a little cooler. Um, Having a variety of foods, I think, was helped because there were certain points that I was craving bananas or cookies, and I didn't have them. And I think your body does tell you what you want to eat. Um, More opportunities for nutrition and hydration. So I think the next time I try it, I'm going to actually cut it in half again and do 12 5.18 mile laps. And then just look for a day that's cooler, where that heat isn't going to be a factor. So
Man,
what other advice do you guys have other than those pieces of advice?
Adam, do you want me to hop in there?
Totally.
So, man, I feel like first of all, you touched on a number of very good talking points, and there's a lot to unpack there, which is a good thing. Um, Obviously, and I really enjoyed reading your questionnaire because you are an absolute numbers guy, and you are a machine in the sense of consistency. You wrote down kind of your typical day to day, week in week out training, and we talked about, or you talked about how you have, since 2010 you've ran 18,000 and change miles. You have all of these metrics that are very fun to unpack. Specifically about these two attempts at the 100K. I think you have some very good takeaways in the sense of, most recently you mentioned listen to your body in terms of nutrition, and I think that should be a topic in and of itself is nutrition. So I think that we should talk about that. Another separate topic should be, you mentioned pacing, right? And you have this, I want to hit this target pace. You mentioned it was a bathroom break that's going to stop you. And then it's like, now we have to make up for lost time, literally. And then we go out and just smoke the next couple of miles, where all of a sudden the RPE is probably very high. It completely changes your ability to absorb the nutrition that, even if you had the perfect nutritional plan, the nutritional plan is then adjusted by way of just sheer work output and how difficult you are going. So I think that, yeah, nutrition should be another topic. Just a couple more questions for you, just to paint the picture of both of these races. Is it sounds as if you you had two goals. You had a goal one to finish 100K, but you did also mention that, well, I was off of my target pace. So you kind of have these um, two goals that are not necessarily at odds, but you have a goal to finish, and then you have a goal to perform, right? And you have a target pace in mind. I guess I would ask you to expand on that, and specifically throughout those races, what were the paces that you were looking at? Because um, did you run by purely pace? Did you run by RPE at all? Did you run by heart rate at all? Kind of what was your governor? Um, Maybe we start there, just so I can kind of understand your mentality as you're going through both of these races.
Yeah, well, it definitely wasn't heart rate. I don't look at that much, and actually, I don't know what RPE stands for. So,
Yeah. So, great question. Rate of perceived exertion. So basically,
okay,
how hard does it feel you are going? Um, there's a couple of different scales that you can use. You can go from 1 to 10, or some labs will use a scale that is 6 to 20. Um, that one is less frequently used in the field, just because it's kind of odd to try and run that calculation of how hard am I going,
yeah.
and it's a weird 6 to 20 scale.
Yeah. So I definitely wasn't doing heart rate. Maybe I was doing some RPE, just how I feel.
Yep.
But I was really concentrated on the pace, and I really wanted to run. Or I wasn't trying to hit a time. I was trying to complete 100 kilometers. I did not care how long it took me to do. But
Okay.
in looking at all the ultra distances I've ever run, they all fall, I think, into the, for to use a round number, around 12-minute category. And I think in most of them I was running faster than 12 minutes. But when you stop, to eat something or get something to drink or take a bathroom break, it drops your time. So, I was trying to run around 12 minutes, and I got to be honest, running it around 11:30 just felt so slow. I mean,
Yep.
it almost felt harder to run that slow than if I was running like my normal default, 10-minute mile pace.
Yep.
And so I again, if I think if I had um, ignored the 30-minute the 30-minute mile there, and just ignore, and just whatever pace I was on at that point, just kept that, maybe I could have finished it. Not sure.
Sure. No, that is a valid point, of that pace feeling uncomfortably slow or even just awkward biomechanically, because if you're not running that pace in training, and then all of a sudden you're going to introduce this pace on race day, and it feels weird. And even to the point of RPE, well, does this feel weird because I'm in just running in a different style, or am I actually pushing too hard, or is this too easy? Um, so a massive takeaway there that really applies to a bunch of the training modalities is going to be specificity, or training specifically to with the goal race in mind, right? So um, I think that is a very good uh, takeaway on your own end, to say, well, it felt weird running that pace, especially looking at some of your PRs. I mean, your threshold pace is a little over 7-minute miles, based on your 10K time and your half marathon time, which you averaged a 7:15 for the half marathon, and just over 7 for that 10K. Um, so all of a sudden, throwing in an 11 or 12-minute mile is going to feel strange. Um, just a second ago, though, you had mentioned that your typical day in, day out pace is 10-minute miles. Is that correct? Or what does your typical weekly training look like when you go out and run your 6.5 miles?
I would say that, for my entire life, my sort of default built-in pace is 10 minutes, 10 minutes per mile. That time in 2023 where I tore my hamstring, um, let's say 1900 miles into the year, it was actually down to 940, which was the fastest, year I'd ever had at that point. But just looking, okay, so this past week, I've run 52 miles so far, and my average pace was 10:01. So if I look at last year, um, actually this year so far, my average pace has been 10:43. Last year, my average pace for the entire year was 10:06. So when you factor in the slow runs, I do a lot of. Last year, I did a lot of runs at like 11 minutes, 11:30. You know what I mean? They were longer, and
Mm-hmm.
they were maybe under not ideal circumstances, hot day, cold day, not feeling great day. But but yeah, I think around 10 minutes is my default factory default.
Cool. Adam, do you have thoughts on the pacing realm, or topic specifically, or anything else on that idea of specificity training wise for the pacing aspect?
Yeah, I do. I think that for races like this, and as you get longer and longer, the difference between your everyday pace and your race pace is going to get bigger and bigger. Um, and I think you're entering a level of distance where it's causing some issues. So getting more specific, just like Travis said, doing some runs that are slower in training, to kind of mimic that can be great. Um, I do think I'll throw in that I think a little bit of walking before you need to during the race is good, and therefore you might do a little in training too.
Hmm.
But also on race day, I don't think you need to artificially slow yourself down to close to your overall pace. Um, for example, if someone's going to run a 24-hour 100-mile, and that's going to average them, that's like roughly 15 minutes per mile. I don't want them to start at 15-minute pace. That's going to be weird, way too
Hmm.
easy. So maybe you start at 10:30, something close to your everyday, but it's still pretty easy. Um, because an even pace distribution is nice in a marathon, but as you go longer, we're dealing with more and more factors that aren't going to play nicely with that even pace.
That's really interesting because that's sort of by default. If at the end of 24 hours or 100 miles or whatever, your pace is going to average out to be about 14 minutes. That is, you are definitely going to have to do some walking in there to slow it down
Definitely.
from. Yeah. So that
And you
is very
will.
interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, but let's
And
definitely
the
go ahead.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. I just was going to say the inverse to that applies as well. Is not only where they'll definitely be walking, there will definitely be faster miles to Adam's point, right? You're going to have to make that up, for lack of a better term, at some point, and it's more likely to for that occur on the front end, right? Let's talk nutrition. That is a massive um, question mark that I would like to answer and hear what you have been doing in training, and in particular on these long days, because um, the nutrition on a weekday run that is not your long Sunday run is a good to know thing, but especially if it's less than an hour and a half long, it's not as critical as what I would like to hear what you're doing on some of these longer training days. Of what does that look like for you?
So, nutrition on a long run, um, for me, I've always just, honestly, I've always kind of done what it says on the back of a goo pack, which is, every
Yeah.
45 minutes with hydration, right?
Sure.
I have not deviated very much from that. So, when I go out on a 20-mile run, I'll actually put the hydration, every 5 miles or so, and then I'll carry whatever that is, four or five goo packs with me, and that's what I'll do. On my two 100-kilometer attempts, I added into that Uncrustables, peanut butter and jelly Uncrustables, to get some actual food. Um, and I tolerate those pretty well. Um, Again, I just think I needed more variety. Um, I somewhere, it might have been mile 40. I was really craving a banana, and I went inside the house and got a banana, and oh, it tasted so good. And I was really craving like soft chocolate chip cookies, but we didn't have any, so you know. And the other thing that I think I was doing that was kind of weird was I was using 0-calorie Gatorades as my hydration. And looking back on that now, it just seems like a wasted opportunity to get some more calories by using sugary Gatorades.
Okay. Adam, what are your initial thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm always surprised that they haven't changed the writing on the back of the goo packets yet. Every time I see that, I don't quite know where they got it. It's probably some 90s science that's beyond my time on this earth. But if you're really plugged into the space, kind of across endurance sports, you hear all sorts of stories about people doing 120 grams an hour now. And, for reference, that'd be like 6 goos, I think, roughly
Yeah.
per hour. Don't go do that. We'll start right there. That's kind of its own discussion. But I think getting closer to that might be pretty beneficial here. And I know that probably sounds a bit intimidating because you're already having issues at the level you're at. But I think so. 2 gels an hour, like 2 goos an hour, is a pretty reasonable target. I mean, that only puts you at like 40 grams, but that's a big improvement. Ideally, getting closer to that 60-gram mark. But those probably sound like giant leaps right now. And that can happen over a long period of time. The same way that you built your mileage up slowly, you can build that up slowly. It's absolutely something you can do. It'll just take a little bit of time and practice in these long runs. But on the variety piece, I would urge you to go explore the whole wide world of options out there now. There's more options than I can keep up with. All of my athletes have like some sort of gel I've never heard of. I can't possibly try them all at the rate that I see them pop up in the running store or online. But go to maybe thefeed.com or your local running store and just start grabbing stuff that looks interesting. You never know what's going to click with you. A lot of people that don't love goo will then find a different texture, flavor profile that really works with them, and something's going to click. And you'll probably have more than a few things that kind of click. And then you can get some variety in there too. Same thing goes with the Gatorade. You're absolutely right that it's a good opportunity for calories to get a little bit in the drink mix. Nothing overly wrong with Gatorade, but sometimes the flavor is a bit strong. You might find something that is a little bit less aggressive on the palate. That's more made for endurance sports rather than Gatorade is maybe more like a team sports drink, or at this point, they're just like a cultural soft drink. Is probably their main use. I still use them on like runs when I'm being cheap about things, or I run by a gas station. But I think it's a pretty strong flavor that around mile 50 you might get quite sick of. So all sorts of other ones out there like Scratch. I don't know, I could name a million, but they're all out there. Go give them a try. But I think that alone, that nutrition segment would lead to a big improvement for you, with legs feeling less dead as you go on. And in the 50K range, a couple gels here and there for a fit guy that's been training for a while, you can get away with a lot. As that distance goes up, you're going to get away with less and less of not having higher carbohydrate intake. I do like the
Yeah,
Uncrustables, by the way.
I definitely 60 grams. I mean, I'm not. And by the way, I have read those articles
Okay.
where they say you're supposed to be doing 60, 90, 120 grams. And I'm like, you're not, you're going to be constantly, eating the entire time. I mean, that's a lot of gel packs.
Yeah.
But I do think that you're 100% correct that there's like you can move towards that and see how it works.
Yeah, I think that there is some really low hanging fruit there in the nutritional department for you. Because if it is working out to roughly 30 grams an hour for you, um, you know, for these 5 to 5.5 or 6 hour events for 100K, that's just not going to sustain you. And a note on some of these crazy numbers that we hear. I have heard even in the high 100s. A lot of
Yeah.
these are taken from cyclists primarily. I did hear of one that was a triathlete, but it's an apples to oranges comparison when you're looking at the ability. And these are elite cyclists also. So that's a massive caveat that these guys are burning an outrageous amount of calories per hour that are all carbohydrates. They're also on a bike, so it is a little bit easy to digest. Um, and they have worked their way up to that. Back to Adam's point of they did not wake up one day and their nutritionists say, "Let's try 120 today." Like it very much is something that you work up, and I think that Adam is spot on. Of even going from 30 to inching to that closer to that 60, I think will be massive gains just in terms of how you feel. And it will be back to that RPE. You will just feel like things maybe are less strenuous, but also I think mechanically your legs will be just functioning better. So it will be both kind of a mental improvement as well as an actual improvement in the legs. So I think that the nutrition side of things is big, and I would echo Adam's sentiment in that everybody is going to have a different preference on their palate profile. Some people can do the same thing day in, day out and just be fine. Um, Even the viscosity of these different gels greatly vary. I find goos to be very, very thick and difficult for me to put down. Whereas some people like doing just sports drink mix, or there's other goos that are kind of somewhere in the middle that are pretty dang liquid and easy to toss back even without the need of water. But you'll never know until you get out there and have trial and error. And it seems like you are just fine with trying stuff out, because it's okay if you find something that doesn't work out. You can scratch that off the list, keep on going. It's not even really an error. It's a learning point. But I think that giving different things a go is going to be critical to finding what works out for you. And even to the point of Uncrustables, keep trying out different solids. Solids are a little bit more realistic in these 100K events versus your 5K. Do you know what I mean? You're not going to be throwing back an Uncrustable at mile 2 of a 5K. So I think that just experimenting with different things is a very, very big takeaway, and that's got to be done during your training and specifically your long day trainings.
Absolutely. Let's definitely touch on hydration real quick, just to get like
Yeah,
an idea of where we're at there. And then if we can, I mean, the back-to-back runs I think is a really cool topic, and we're not leaving without mentioning the taper.
taper.
So,
We have to.
well, yeah, let's start with hydration. When are you drinking by feel? Do you have a plan? Like, I'm going to drink this much per hour. Where do you fall in there?
So I generally drink by feel. I don't believe that if you're thirsty, you're overly dehydrated. Um, I, you know, with some exceptions, right? So again, this last time my most recent attempt in 2024, I was hydrating, roughly every 5 miles. But not like clockwork, right? I was drinking when I felt thirsty, but I had, every 10 miles, I had as much fluid as I wanted to drink. And then I would fill up, my hip pack and take it with me. And then, then I would have however much I wanted over the next 5 miles, or no, the next 10 miles. However, I will say absolutely that from mile 40 to mile 50, I, you know, I, I got a lot of hydration at mile 40, and then mile 42, I was thirsty again. And so I drank I think my packs are only 8 ounces. I drank mine, and then I was thirsty again, and I ended up drinking my son's because he also had one. He didn't need it as much. Um, and so yeah, that last mile 40 to mile 50, I was very thirsty. So that was certainly a problem.
You have thoughts, Adam? You want me to hop
We'll
in?
start with you, and then I'll go.
Yeah, one thing that did immediately hop out to me that I think would be of value and very easy to do is, have you performed a sweat rate test before?
I have.
Okay,
Yeah, I have done that before, and
gotcha.
I absolutely know how it works.
Perfect. And I ask because that's very much something that can at least put you in the ballpark of what to shoot for in terms of volume of fluid to take in per hour. Um,
And it's not 100%, right? You're not. Are you trying to drink as exactly as much as you're sweating out, or some percentage thereof?
No, that's a good question. I think that there's a couple of ways to approach it. Um, One is going to be if you're considering the sodium content within that volume of fluid that you're losing. And so the recommendations on that is that you do not need to try and replace that 100% in terms of sodium replacement. I think a good rule of thumb is shooting for 75%. Um, of that, just being close to that. It's not an exact science. Um, I think that salt will do a few other things for you too. Is so long as it's within that realm of acceptability, it's going to help with some of the GI stuff that I think that you have had before. Um, and it will also help with some of the hydration of just pulling water in. Um, so it's hard to know exactly why you got super thirsty all of a sudden at mile 40. It could have been it could have been this kind of ticking clock that you were slowly getting behind and you didn't realize it until around that mark, and finally your body was like, "Hey, I'm thirsty." Um, because it's not a switch, it's going to be a dial. Um, but anyways, good to know that you are familiar with the sweat rate test. I think important is to do the sweat rate test in as similar to conditions as the day of that you can, whether that's temperature or humidity. all of the things, and even clothing that you're wearing, because again, not an exact science, but just get close. Um, in terms of volume wise, I think that there's some room to play with it. I wouldn't try and probably replace, more than what you're sweating, of course. I think it's going to be okay if you shoot for just get close to what you're losing. Um, you have some error. We can all, once we get dehydrated to roughly 2 to 3% of our body weight, is when we start to feel it. So maybe that's when you felt the switch hit at mile 40. Who knows? But um, you don't have to hit it right on the head. Just be close in terms of volume and just be close in terms of sodium replacement. Um, those are some initial thoughts that I had.
Yeah, I know as far as the volume that I've definitely heard, and maybe you're referencing like an article or podcast you've seen. I've heard this like, oh, you only want to replace 85 to 90%. I forget what their exact recommendations are. And as much as that's probably true, of course, as the duration of the event gets longer, there's going to be almost an asymptotic relationship where you're getting closer and closer to replacing the full amount. Um, but also in practice, I have not found that to be very useful. So if someone sweats a liter per hour, it's already, I mean, just
It's
from
a
my
lot.
experience helping people with their hydration plan, it's not nearly an exact enough science from the loss standpoint, because who knows when you're climbing up a hill and it's more exposed, or there's a nice breeze and you got ice at the last aid station. Um, and how exact you can be with, okay, I drank 400 milliliters this half hour and 400 milliliters the next half hour. It just doesn't work out like that. So I love Travis's advice of get it close. If you want to like just dial it back a little bit for that safety. But if you're overhydrating, it's you're going to be peeing a lot too. You're going to be feeling not so great. There's some signs that can kind of point you in that direction. From another practical standpoint, as someone that helps people kind of traverse aid stations all the time, 10 miles with almost anything that will fit on a hip pack, I I bet it's not enough. Would be
Mhm.
my guess. And knowing your road background, you probably don't like running with packs. If I had to guess, am I close?
Yeah.
Okay. But finding
Yeah.
some way to get a little bit more water. So maybe two handhelds, something
Mhm.
like that, or just that shorter loop you were talking about.
Right.
Mhm.
That's one way to do it. So I think with that, you're going to be off to a good start. And then when you get to that thirsty section, you at least can correct better. Um, of okay, now I'm only thirsty for 3 miles instead of 8.
Mhm.
Yep. That's all good advice.
Yeah. I would assume that that's probably playing a role. By the way, what were the results of the sweat test? Like, how much do you lose?
Oh goodness, that I do not remember.
Hmm.
Yeah, I've done it multiple times, but I don't remember. Well, and part of the problem is again, as you said, it's going to be a lot different on a 90-degree sunny day versus a 40-degree overcast day. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Hmm.
It's going to be an entirely different amount.
Yep.
But I definitely, absolutely have done the, weighing myself dirty naked weight before the run, and then after the run, and then just calculate the per mile, per mile or per minute or per hour lost.
Mhm.
Like my brother used to say, it's a pint a pound. So you know, 2 pounds down, 2 pints.
Yep. And I know you're a numbers guy, but just get close.
Yeah,
Just get close.
and I also think again, uh, you as we've said a lot, you want to listen to your body. So if you know where you are and you're not thirsty and you have it available for you, there's I don't think there's any reason to just drink a certain amount every 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think listening to your body is a gigantic part of it. Um, in really extreme conditions, thirst can stop being a perfect marker, say like a Badwater 135, if you're familiar with that race.
Oh yeah, I'm
Um,
familiar with it.
but I think drinking to thirst as a general thing is not a bad heuristic or idea at all. So I'm right with you there. Travis, do you have time left for us to talk
Yes,
about back to
yes.
backs? And cool.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
and
Um,
I
Those.
and I
mhm.
actually have two specific questions that we can
Oh, let's
save for
do
the
it.
end.
Okay, cool. Well, as far as the back to backs, I think it could be a useful thing to implement in your training for the durability side of things. So concentrating volume is nice. It's probably more ultra specific along that theme of specificity, but do you have to? No. I've coached someone for 100 miler that could only do a 2 hour long run on Sundays and they got it done. Is that a fantastic idea? No, but life is life. Sometimes it's all you got. Um, I to skip to the end there, I don't think we're for the most part dealing with a fitness problem here. You're a very fit guy. You do a lot of training. Um, I, you this could lead to some improvements, but it's not on the top of the list for me personally. Travis, do you have anything to add on that front?
No, I think that there is value, and there would be value for back to backs for you. Um, but kind of reiterating, it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be scientific. The whole idea is to um, increase that volume to try and simulate the fatigue that you're going to feel later on in the day. And so you had mentioned, doing 17-17 or 18-18 or whatever. Doesn't have to be perfect. Just get out there and have 2 long days. They don't have to be the exact same amount of time. They don't have to be the exact same amount of distance. They don't have to be the exact same route. You could have something that has more climbing or what. I think that the big takeaway is I think that there's value in doing that. Is it absolutely critical for you? To Adam's point, I would agree and say no, because you have a bunch of miles in your legs. I think I keep coming back to the word specificity of trying to get specific to the goal in mind. And just briefly, your 21 goals has a wide ranging things, whether it's a 5K PR or if it's the most miles in a month or a year. And um, it can be hard to nail all of those goals because they are so wide ranging. And so now, not impossible, but there's something to be said for specificity for a particular goal in mind. So my recommended training for you doing 100K would look very different than my recommended training for you to go get your PR in the 5K. Yeah.
Yep. Let's talk about tapering. Travis, what do you think about tapering? Do we have to taper for
Yeah.
ultras? I've kind of heard that before probably on Facebook groups.
Well, man, this is good. I will give you my thoughts. Every, even Adam and I, you can ask 100 different people what the exact perfect training plan should look like to include tapering. You will get 100 different answers. So I think that there are many ways to achieve success in whatever the goal is. Now, tapering specifically, I'm a believer simply because the body needs rest to adapt. The classic general adaptation syndrome is stress plus rest equals adaptation, and you certainly stress your body enough, especially if you're getting out doing 100-mile week is a massive amount of volume. That's a massive amount of stress. Um, so there's a lot that goes into it, and I think even more specifically with the general adaptation syndrome, my uh, what I like to change a little bit to that is the proper stress plus the adequate rest equals the preferred adaptation. And so my point with that is you want to stress your body again specifically with the goal in mind. You have to give your body enough rest ultimately so you can have the ideal adaptation that you want. So yeah, tapering, in a nutshell, yes, I think that prior to a big 100K like this, I would absolutely give my body rest so it can adapt, so the form can build back up, and ultimately so you can feel fresh on the day of. It's not an exact science. We talked a lot about, I think you mentioned that somebody had mentioned doing 40% volume and then 20% or 20% or something like that. I forget what the exact recommendation you had received, but um, yeah, I think reducing volume, you can still maintain some intensity over the last 1 to 2 weeks, even if you wanted to stretch it out a little bit so you don't feel super flat. Rest is absolutely vital, though. So yes, rest. I would just coincide that with the tapering, which we need for the adaptation and form.
Do you have any thoughts on a 3 week taper versus a 4 week taper versus a 2 week taper? I mean, is there
You
a
know, yeah, my thoughts are that it's going to be so different person to person. Some people might say, hey, I'm good with 1 week tapering, and their physiology is good with that. Somebody else might need closer to that 4. And it again is going to go back to kind of this trial and error of, and really knowing you. You have this wealth of history kind of stored up that you can look back and maybe try and identify some themes or just particular things that you've noticed of when I take a week off, man, I feel like I'm really ready to go. Or do you feel flat? And then it takes a little while for you to get back going. Or so I think it's going to vary person to person. A rough, very, very general rule of thumb, I'm a fan of anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks. I think 4 weeks to me starts to feel kind of long. I think 1 week is kind of short. Um, but man, it's so variable from person to person. What are your thoughts, Adam?
Yeah, I float right there with you around 2 to 3 weeks most of the time. Of course, if someone it's like a C race for someone, it's not important. It's a little different, but some sort of deloading for sure. So the most important thing is that there is some sort of taper, because right now there's none. In fact, there's almost the opposite. Your biggest week is prior to it,
Yep.
which is great from like a confidence boost standpoint, because you probably feel like $1,000,000. Look at this training that I just knocked out. But then theoretically within that framework that Travis laid out, you're at your most fatigued as well. And if you insert time and recovery, then hopefully you're adapted to that fatigue. And if you want like a useful thought process here is that you go do a run, and how much longer is it until you bear some sort of fruits in adaptation and you're fitter from that run? 42 days ish, like 6 weeks ish, and it's a lot more complex than that, but that is kind of a good rule of thumb there. So if you think about that, nothing you do the week before will really make you that much fitter, but it can make you a lot more tired. So getting some big weeks out in the past, you're probably much more product of the last decade you've been running in the last 3 months, than you are a product of the last 2 weeks of running ahead of that. So yeah, do some sort of deloading. We could get specific with that if you want, but 2 weeks, knock it down, a good chunk each week. Um, and then the rest is just kind of squabbling over the details.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, my standard for marathons is 3 weeks.
Hmm.
So,
There you go.
um, and that seems to have worked well for me.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would pretty much copy and paste what has worked well for you in the past. I want to try to change it. But I think that is actually probably, the nutrition is important too, but I think this is probably a huge factor
Yeah.
in what we've been trying to fix here.
So I have two questions for y'all.
Let's do it.
Question one: when should I try again?
I was going to ask you when you want to.
As soon as possible,
Mhm.
but at the same time, I don't want to be ridiculous. I'll probably end up running close to 60 miles this particular week. Um, you know,
I'm trying to look back. When was this most recent attempt?
uh, beginning October, I think it was.
Yep, it was October 5th. And then in November, you had some moderate training. And at least if Strava is accurate, there was less training in December and January, by a little bit.
There was none in December.
Mhm.
That's that I when I complete these 21 PRs or come close to them, by the time I hit that 108 miles in a week, that like the day after that last, like the Monday after that ends, I'm like, that's it. I don't ever want to run. I don't want to run ever again. My entire life, I'm done.
Yep.
So that was my December this year.
You don't want that week to be right before your 100K attempt.
No, no. Again, when you say it out loud, it really sounds stupid. You
But
know,
it's
and
not stupid. I see how your brain gets there.
yeah, I
Yep.
mean, again, on the one hand, you think, oh man, I ran 108 miles last week. I should be able to do 62 miles easy, but it doesn't work that way. So,
Yep.
so again, when do you think would be reasonable to try again? A month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months?
I'll throw out my 2 cents. That especially with like a little bit less training in December and January, it'd be nice if the training had been a little bit higher. You could almost do it anytime, and that's a lot of my athletes that I work with are fit enough to run 100K almost any day. Of course, you want to train up so that you're kind of doing it to the best of your ability, or you have the best possible shot at completing it. Um, I think a reasonable, if I had to throw something out, 6 months. You could do it in less if you want to play with that risk reward model a little bit more. And then if you want it to be really conservative, a year. But I honestly think that'd be overkill. So hopefully that gives you like some sort of ballpark info. I don't know, Travis, any particular thoughts there?
Man, I think that I agree 100% with that. You could be aggressive. I don't have your most recent couple months pulled up in front of me, but with your history, you could be aggressive, like Adam said, and try and just get to it sooner. I don't see a lot of value in that. And to me, you strike me as somebody who is very calculated, but also very motivated. And my approach to that would be, let's create a really good game plan that is going to set you up for success, that is not overly aggressive. It doesn't need to be, like Adam is saying, super conservative. I don't think a year out is necessary for success. But I think that 6 months gives you adequate time to nail down a lot of the details of figuring out nutrition, reestablishing some of the lost time, if you will, over the last couple of months, and then being specific to the 100K goal. That I think there would be a lot of confidence going into that with pretty dang good assurance that it would be a successful day. Um, yeah, I agree 100% with you, Adam.
And then I guess my last question is, when do you know you're ready? Like
That's
with the
a very
marathon,
good question.
I think that's an easy question to answer with a like I always, when I talk to people and it's like, oh, I can't, how I would like to run a marathon, but how do I know when I'm ready? I always tell people, I'm like, look, if you can run more than 16 miles at one, go around, and you're running 36, 40, 50 miles a week, you can finish a marathon.
Mm,
And I only say that because I've probably run a half a dozen marathons on that,
mm.
on that kind of training, which I realize is not enough. But I think if you can run 60 miles, you can hobble through those last 10. But I have no idea what that metric would be for a 50K. I mean, I think we have talked about already. If I could do 20-mile runs back to back, or even 18-mile runs back to back, that'd be a pretty good metric. Are there any others that I'm not thinking of?
I was just gonna say, I don't know if there would be a specific metric of almost like a checking the box of I have now hit a two back to back 20-mile days. I don't think that similar to the marathon. There's not a wonderful way to correlate it to the ultra marathon distance. Um, I think it's going to be a little bit more ambiguous in the sense that the confidence is going to build throughout the training to where your volume is growing. Maybe you have a couple of training camps is what we would call it, but weekends that are big where you have some back-to-back days, or just in general, the volume for that week is big, that are going to be massive confidence boosters. I think as the confidence grows in the nutrition and you're nailing that, I think that there might not be just a day that you wake up and you say, I have done it. I'm ready. I think it's going to be this kind of cloudy, oh, things are coming, they're falling into place. And now it's going to be like, I think that I'm ready, or I am confident in what I have done. Um, and I've checked the boxes on, I've got my nutrition dialed, I've got my mentality dialed, I've got my, the things that you can control, all of the things that you can control dialed. And then you have the confidence in the training done. I think that that's when it's going to be, you're going to slowly ease into that like knowledge of I'm ready. It may not be those marathon training plans are so dang linear that your long days get, or your long runs on the weekends build up to 1820, and then cool, that's your last long run before you taper. That's when you kind of check the box and say I'm ready.
Yeah.
It's just not that uh, clear cut, in my opinion.
What about weekly mileage? Do you think you can do 100 kilometers, 100 miles on 50, 60 miles a week? Or is it better to build up to 108 miles a week?
Yeah.
Adam, your thoughts?
hmm Travis, I really like what you brought up of making sure that you feel set with like your nutrition plan and other things too. Because I was going to come at this from the classic, like just physiology coach perspective. So I'm glad we have that kind of couched first. Um, so I want to touch on two things, kind of like the minimum rule of thumb, and then also more that question of like how much is too much. Because I know that's that was probably some sort of questions or criticism on the Facebook post that you got, and questions that you might have.
A lot.
Yeah. And so for the first part, there is this principle that I'm not going to take any credit for. This came from our head coach here, Jason Koop, the min max principle for different ultra distances. And for 100K to 100 miles, uh, the minimum amount of the maximum part of your training. So when you're peaking for a couple big weeks here would be about 9 hours a week. And I believe that's for roughly 6 weeks in a row. Is that a hard and fast perfect rule? No, but I love that it throws a rule of thumb out there. I had someone run 100K this last week that did not hit those metrics, maybe even by a solid margin, but that put more emphasis on the other parts of the plan as well, and making sure he had a good day. So in terms of your past training, you're well and above that. You might not think in hours per week, but when you would run 100 miles in a week, roughly 16 hours. So you're way up there.
That's great.
That sort of volume, I know there's kind of there's almost like an anti-volume push out there right now, which I think is kind of interesting. And it's probably a blowback from the more early 2000s where perhaps it was overemphasized at the expense of all else, and without recovery and proper nutrition. But for the most part, more is better. And I know I could probably get crucified for saying that, but it's just true. And we spend a lot of these episodes trying to craft ways for people to run more. Do I think that you need to do much more? No. I think you could do less and be fine too. You kind of held up well through that training block of really high mileage this last season. So I think that's great. It's probably a big reason why you got all those PRs. There's a point of diminishing returns. Like if you could, chart it, it probably, in terms of increased performance, reaches some sort of asymptote somewhere. And of course, you're going to find that somewhere north of like 12, 15 hours a week. Once you're up there, you're doing pretty good. You're going to find elite athletes that do a bit more. Running, it's hard to do all that much more for a lot of reasons, biomechanical, but some people do. Go look at Zach Miller's training ahead of UTMB or Hard Rock. There's some like 30-hour weeks in there. I did that a while ago because I was curious. Not saying to go do that, but there are levels to it, and people do wild things. So don't let people make you feel bad for increasing conservatively to a high workload that worked for you. And is a big reason why you got so fit. So, I think you could do less next time if that was a big ask on your life and it was really busy. You'd be more than capable of it if you hang out at that 10-hour a week range, which I don't know, that'd be like 50, 60 miles for you, something in that ballpark.
Yeah, that's. I mean, I was pulled out the calculator, and it seemed like 9 hours was in the 50, 60,
Mm-hmm.
ballpark. And I'm not going to lie, running an average of 15 miles a day in a week, it's not fun.
No, yeah, that's pretty
Yeah.
hard.
And this is supposed to be fun. I think that's a big thing is sustainability, and it's supposed to be enjoyable as well. So a part of that mentality of going back to the post 108 mile week where you were like, I don't ever want to lace up again. We don't want those feelings.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Few and far between. So yeah, with that context that it was pretty hard, you could totally do less and have a great day. It may have been too much, but I think for the most part, there just wasn't enough of that recovery after.
Right.
The recovery makes too much better.
So I'm going to I'm not going to try to set a new weekly mileage or monthly mileage distance in 2025. I'm going to kick that down to 2026.
Yeah, probably not if this is the main goal of the year. And the only caveat I had to the timing, by the way, is if you wanted to put things slightly more in your favor, you could choose like a cooler December day. But as long as you're not in the heat of the day and you go in with a good hydration plan, I don't think 70 degrees should stop you.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know though. Last two ones I've tried, that heat,
Mm-hmm.
I'm when you said 6 months, I'm thinking, yeah, we're talking November.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, nothing wrong with November.
Yeah.
I do want to. I am a little bit interested. The next time I try to set my most elevation in a run, I want to run up Mount Washington.
Oh yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Not in the race, just they don't open the road until 9 a.m. So I figure if I started like at dawn, because last time I set my elevation run, it was running up and down a steep hill in Philadelphia, and I had to run 20 miles to hit that and Mount Washington, it would only be, there's, like they say in the race, there's only one hill. So I could do that in 7 miles. And it seems like it'd be less punishing.
Yeah, exactly. And a fun day, a fun challenge.
Yeah. Fun being a relative term.
Yeah. Certain type of fun. Cool. Well, are we leaving you hanging with any big question marks here, or did we hit most of it?
No, I think we hit all of them. The nutrition. What I really like about this conversation is it's given me some specifics, and um, I have not had a lot of specifics that didn't come out of my own head, right? But I think that I'm not eating enough, not drinking enough. Maybe I'm running too far each week. So those are all great specifics.
Yeah, I'm really glad you got something out of it. And I like to be specific. I know as a coach, there's a tendency to not be specific because, I can always have a voice of what I would think listening, and I can think of 3 counterexamples of why I'm wrong. But I think there's so much value in giving practical advice and just choosing something. Plenty of people might think 60 grams an hour is a little too low, or some people think it's too high. But I love getting people from far off the mark to near the mark. So I'm glad you appreciated that aspect.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And Travis, I'm sure I'll talk about this in the intro, but thank you so much for hopping on last minute and kind of saving the day.
Oh, my pleasure, man. This was a treat. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks to both of you. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to help me, little old me, little old non-elite old guy.
It's a lot of fun, man. Yeah, it was a very enjoyable conversation.
All right. Thank you so much to Travis and Clark for joining me on that episode. Clark, I'm really excited for him. I think with the handful of honestly small tweaks that we discussed, he's going to be very successful. I think he could be successful 3 weeks from now if he wanted to be, but our plan of really getting another solid training block in and practicing some of the things we talked about is great. I found this to be a really entertaining conversation to have. I hope that carried through to the podcast and that you all got something out of it as well, even on just more generalized topics like how much volume is too much. I know that's a big question and a bit of a hot topic out there. Thanks again to Travis for jumping on last minute. If you would like to help this show, the best way to do so is leave a rating or review, or you can share it with a friend. Anything that helps us grow is appreciated by me. So thank you all for joining me, and I'll see you next time.